Welcome to Cheat Masters. Join us for relatable cheating stories that will make you laugh, cry, and nod your head in recognition that IT started when I met him at a charity event. I had just come out of a rocky marriage, feeling unsure of where my life was heading. At 54, I never imagined I would find someone like him, a 27-year-old man with an energy and charm that was contagious. He was confident, funny, and incredibly kind. We started talking, and despite the significant age gap, we connected in a way I hadn't experienced in years. We began meeting more often. At first, it felt innocent, just two people with similar interests. But over time, things shifted. He would send me thoughtful texts, share deep conversations, and even take me out to dinner. He seemed genuinely interested in me, and I, honestly, was flattered. There was a part of me that was surprised someone so young would want to spend time with someone like me, but I didn't question it. It felt good to be desired again. One evening, after a particularly intimate conversation, we found ourselves in a situation neither of us had planned. What started as a simple kiss quickly escalated. I should have stopped it. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't. I was overwhelmed by the attention and the excitement of being wanted. That night, we crossed a line that I would later regret. The affair continued in secret. We both knew it was wrong, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't for years. I justified it by telling myself that my marriage had been over for a long time. It was a thrill, a dangerous escape from the monotony of my life. But deep down, I knew I was betraying my own values, and the guilt started to eat at me. He seemed to thrive in the secrecy of it all. He was careful, never letting anyone in our lives find out. But as time went on, I began to notice small things that made me question his intentions. He started pulling away, becoming distant, less available. What had once been a passionate connection now felt like something that was slipping through my fingers. One day, I found a message on his phone. It was from a woman, and the words were unmistakable. He was seeing someone else. The betrayal stung, but it also made me realize that I had been fooling myself. This wasn't about love. It had been a selfish, impulsive affair driven by desire and loneliness, not a meaningful connection. When I confronted him, he admitted to the other relationship, but he also told me that he cared about me in his own way. I was devastated. It wasn't just a cheating. It was a realization that I had allowed myself to be deceived. I thought he was someone I could trust, someone who understood me. But in the end, he was just another man who used me for what I could offer in the moment, with no intention of staying. That affair marked the end of something I could never undo. The guilt and regret lingered long after we went our separate ways. I learned that sometimes, in moments of vulnerability, we make decisions that we later have to live with. It was a painful lesson in infidelity, one that taught me about the consequences of both betrayal and self-deception. The weeks after the confrontation were the hardest. I found myself questioning everything about my life, my choices, and what had led me to this point. I spent days wallowing in self-doubt, replaying the moments with him in my head, wondering where I had gone wrong. What had I been seeking? Was it love, or just an escape from my own loneliness? It was hard to admit to myself that I had been so vulnerable, that I had allowed someone to manipulate my feelings without truly understanding their intentions. The hardest part, however, was dealing with the aftermath. The guilt was overwhelming, and I knew I couldn't just sweep it under the rug. I had been married for years, and although my marriage had been over in many ways long before this affair, I still felt a sense of betrayal toward my ex-husband. He had been a good man, but we had grown apart. I thought I was making up for lost time, but instead, I found myself sinking deeper into regret. I spent a lot of time reflecting, speaking to friends who had gone through their own struggles, and even seeking therapy. I needed to understand why I had allowed myself to be in that situation. What had made me so desperate for attention, for affection, from someone so much younger? Why had I ignored the red flags when they were right in front of me? Slowly, I started to rebuild my sense of self. I had been defined by my relationships. First my marriage, then the affair, but now I needed to find my own identity again. I started to focus on my career, on the things I had neglected over the years. I took up hobbies I had put aside and made new friends who supported me without judgment. Months later, I ran into him again unexpectedly. He looked the same, perhaps a little more confident, but there was something different in his eyes. He seemed almost regretful. We exchanged a few awkward words, and he apologized. He said he was sorry for how things had ended, for the way he had treated me. And in that moment, I realized that I had long forgiven him, not for his actions, but for my own peace of mind. The pain had faded enough for me to see it clearly. It was then that I understood. The affair had never been about him. It had been about me, about my need to feel alive, desired, and important. I had projected all my hopes and desires onto him, and when the fantasy crumbled, I was left with the harsh reality of my own shortcomings. But I had learned from it. I had faced my demons, learned to forgive myself, and promised never to let my insecurities dictate my choices again. I moved forward, taking the lessons of the past with me. The affair, painful as it had been, had served its purpose. It was a wake-up call, a lesson in self-awareness. I had made a mistake, but I wasn't defined by it. I was still me, a woman who deserved respect, honesty, and love. And I was finally ready to give that to myself first. As time passed, I focused more on nurturing myself, rebuilding my life piece by piece. It wasn't easy. Old habits and insecurities crept in occasionally, and the guilt from the affair would sometimes resurface. But I learned how to cope with it. I worked on accepting that making mistakes didn't mean I was a bad person. It meant I was human, and it was in those moments of self-compassion that I began to truly heal. I also began to understand the dynamics of the relationships I had been in. The affair, for all its excitement and thrills, was ultimately a reflection of my own need for validation. It wasn't about him or even about our age gap. It was about the emptiness I had felt inside. I had searched for someone to fill that void, and for a brief moment, he had. But what I realized over time was that I didn't need someone else to fix me. I was the one who needed to heal. I invested in my well-being mentally, emotionally, and physically. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with my passions and hobbies, painting, hiking, cooking, things I had once loved but had neglected while caught up in the whirlwind of the affair. Months later, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd reach: contentment. I had forgiven myself completely and had come to terms with the past. I wasn't searching for validation from anyone anymore. I had learned the importance of standing on my own 2 feet, of knowing my worth without needing someone else to affirm it. And then one day, I met someone new. It wasn't anything dramatic. We met casually through mutual friends. He was in his mid-30s, kind, grounded, and stable. He wasn't the wild, unpredictable person I had once been drawn to, but there was something comforting about him, something steady. It was different this time. I wasn't in search of excitement or distraction. Instead, I was looking for someone I could truly build something with, based on mutual respect and understanding. We took things slowly, carefully, making sure we communicated openly and honestly with each other. I shared my past, not as an excuse but as part of who I was. He listened, and without judgment, he accepted me. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We built our connection on trust, not on thrills or chasing fantasies. Through this relationship, I learned that real intimacy wasn't about the rush of infidelity or the excitement of something forbidden. It was about knowing and accepting each other fully, flaws and all. It was about being vulnerable in a way that allowed for growth and support, not one-sided desires or manipulation. Looking back on the affair, I could finally see it for what it was, a chapter in my life that had served its purpose. It had been painful and messy, but it had led me to a deeper understanding of myself. I had learned what it meant to be honest with myself and others. The affair had taught me the importance of boundaries, trust, and the fact that true love starts with loving yourself. Now, I wasn't defined by my mistakes or my past. I was defined by the person I had become, the person who had grown through the experience, who had made amends with herself, and who was ready to embrace a future built on authenticity and genuine connection. And while I would always carry the lessons of that affair with me, I no longer felt trapped by it. It had simply become a part of my story, one that had helped shape me into the woman I was proud to be today. As the months turned into a year, I found myself increasingly grateful for the lessons I had learned, and for the life I was now building. My new relationship, while still in its early stages, felt grounded in something deeper than the fleeting passions of the past. It was rooted in mutual respect, open communication, and shared values. There was no rush, no pressure to live up to some ideal of romance. We simply enjoyed each other's company, learning together, building trust, and, most importantly, healing together. Through this journey, I realized that the affair had not only taught me about the fragility of relationships, but also about the strength within myself. I had learned to embrace the full spectrum of my emotions, the vulnerability, the guilt, the shame, and transform them into something empowering. It wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I no longer defined myself by my past mistakes, but by how I had risen above them. My ex-husband, too, had moved on. We had both gone through our own separate journeys, each of us finding our own way to heal and grow. I had reached out to him at one point, not to reignite old flames, but to have closure. We shared a conversation that was difficult but necessary, where we both acknowledged the pain and the love we had once shared. We apologized for the ways we had hurt each other, and in doing so, we found a sense of peace in our separation. It was a chapter closed, no longer weighed down by bitterness or resentment. As I grew more comfortable in my own skin, I started to appreciate the things that truly mattered. My friendships deepened. I rekindled connections with old friends I had neglected in my pursuit of external validation. I learned how to be present, how to listen, and how to give love without expecting anything in return. I embraced the quiet moments of life, the simple joys, and in those moments, I found the fullness I had once sought in another person. But even more significant than all of that, I learned to embrace my age. At 54, I was no longer concerned with the idea of being too old for love or intimacy. The affair had taught me that age was just a number, and what truly mattered was emotional maturity, self-awareness, and the willingness to continue learning and growing. I had lived through heartache and regret, but I had come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more at peace with who I was. I could look back at that chapter with a sense of understanding. Yes, I had made mistakes. Yes, I had betrayed not just others but myself. But I had also learned the value of self-forgiveness, and that was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Now, I didn't seek external validation. I sought fulfillment from within, and for the first time in years, I was truly happy, not because of a relationship, not because of anyone else's approval, but because I had finally accepted and loved myself. The story of the affair, the pain, and the consequences had become a part of my past, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had led me to a place of self-awareness and self-love, and for that, I was forever grateful. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the deepest lessons come from our most painful experiences. The affair wasn't just a betrayal. It was a catalyst for my own transformation. And now, with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity, I was ready to continue this journey called life, knowing that no matter what came next, I had the strength to face it and to keep growing.